Okay. We're in Titus, chapter 2. Let's bow in a word of prayer as we transition to our study this evening. Heavenly Father, we want to give you thanks for your word. We thank you for bringing us out this evening to study, to pour ourselves into the scriptures. We ask that as we try to understand what the Bible is saying, that we pray that you would teach us the truths of your holy word. Encourage and strengthen us, I pray, in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, so we transitioned last week to the third point, the third point that Paul will deal with Titus in reference to his mission, his C point. And here, having addressed the issue of leadership in chapter 1, in chapter 2 and chapter 3, he will now look at order within the church. And this is going to take up the lion's share of the rest of this letter. He begins looking at the order within the church by focusing his attention on the household code. The household code of the church. Now, we say household code because the church is the household of God. It's the household of God. So it shouldn't surprise us that the household of God has a household code. And the household code he deals with first, the household code within. Within, this is talking about internally within the church itself. How do believers behave within the fellowship? How do we carry ourselves? How do we conduct ourselves as Christians? And he first in verse 1 of chapter 2, identified the source of our code. Where exactly does our code come from? According to verse 1. Titus chapter 2, verse 1. Where does our code come from?
Teaching and doctrine.
Doctrine. It comes from the doctrine, the doctrinal basis of our faith. That's where the code comes from. And so we looked at the source of the code in verse 1. Then we began looking at the content of our code. The content of our code. Who does he start with? What part of the congregation does he start with? Older men. The behavior of older men. Do you remember what I said about maybe it's a little surprising that the older men get addressed? I said last week that sometimes we think older men don't need to be instructed. After all, they're seasoned, they're older, they don't need guidance. Well, yeah, they need guidance. Just as the younger men need guidance, the older men need guidance. And Paul doesn't leave anybody out of needing to be taught the scriptures, taught what living as a Christian is to look like. So I introduced that to you last week, and we did not get into the actual things that Paul wanted Titus to guide the older men in. And so let's look at what he says here in verse 2. What are his concerns? He says he wants them to be temperate, dignified, sensible, sound in faith, in love, and in perseverance. All right, so now, I don't know if I brought this out last week. I may have brought it out last week. But the word older men is the Greek word presbytos. Presbytes. And it's related to the Greek word presbyteros, which is the word for elder. Did I mention that last week? I'm not sure. I may have mentioned it last week. I don't remember. But it's interesting here that hold on to that. Just hold on to that for a minute, because I'm going to come back to that I'm going to make a statement about why I think that's important for us to understand before we finish with the older men. So first off, he wants the older men to be temperate. Temperate. What does he mean by temperate? Well, this word could literally mean sober. Sober. So when you hear temperate, think of sober. Now, if somebody is sober, what's true of their thinking process if they're sober? Clear, yes. And that's at the heart of this word. This word, if you want to think of another term to help you think what he's getting at, think of clear-mindedness. Clear-mindedness. This is the concept here. Clear-mindedness. This is a complete clarity of mind and its resulting good judgment. So somebody who's clear-minded will be able to make good judgments. All right? That's what Paul is getting at here. It's in this sense that a derivative of this term was used when Paul was describing senior saints and every Christian. For example, write down these texts: 1 Thessalonians 5:6 and 1 Peter 1, verse 13. Both Paul and Peter use this term not just for older people. Is it good for a young person to be clear-minded? Sure. We all kind of need a little clear-mindedness, no matter what our age is, right? And so it's not surprising that Paul and Peter use a derivative of this word to describe every Christian. Every Christian ought to be clear-minded. All Christians are to evidence a clear-minded approach to life. And Paul specifically identified this character trait as part of the senior men in the congregation. They must be clear-minded, temperate. And he applies that to them specifically. Those who are mature, those who are maturing in the fellowship should be governing themselves and reining in the volatile swings of youthfulness.
What was the reference in 1 Peter?
Yes, 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 13. Both Paul and Peter use it to describe not just older individuals, but every Christian. Every Christian needs to be clear-minded. Next, let's keep going. Paul says that these older men should be dignified. Dignified. Now, in Paul's day, this word was used by the Greeks to describe the venerable or the majestic nature of their gods, or the magnificent nature of certain objects. Its magnificent nature. These are the types of things that were worshipped in the Greek culture. You worship something that you think is significant, that's majestic. What was Paul's point here in using it for the older men in the congregation? Well, to think of these ideas: seriousness and worthiness. Seriousness and worthiness. So when you think about an older man who's dignified, think of an older man who's serious, an older man who evidences worthiness. We might think of the idea of somebody who has stately character. They're a man of stately character. This is an individual that's not frivolous or superficial. Now, does this mean that this man doesn't play with his grandkids? Is he serious like that? Is that the seriousness he's talking about? This is a man who knows when, right? Who knows at the appropriate time. There's a sense in which he has an understanding of the moment, all right, and knows when it's time to play, when it's time to be serious, okay? And so he knows the appropriateness of given times and moments and carries himself appropriately. He's dignified. Dignified. Now, here's something for you. I hope you're keeping track of this. This word was also used in 1 Timothy 3 to describe elders and deaconesses. Both of them were said to be dignified. 1 Timothy 3, verse 8, and 1 Timothy 3, verse 11. But let me drop another one on you. In Philippians 4, verse 8, Paul uses this concept to describe what Christians think about. They think about things that are dignified. So really, this is something all Christians should be concerned about. I don't know if you're following a pattern here. And so these older men are told that they must be dignified, but we see in other places that this dignified nature is really something that every Christian should be marked by. Dignified. Let's move to the third one. Not only temperate or clear-minded, not only dignified, that is serious, worthy, but then he says he must be sensible. Sensible. Think of the idea here of prudent or discreet. Prudent or discreet. This particular word comes from a family of words that referred to having a good or sound judgment. Good or sound judgment. Also, it's related to the concept of self-control. Having a sound mind. The mind worked in the way that it should. What does this relate to in the list so far? Doesn't this go back to the first one? The first one we said clear-mindedness. Here we see sound judgment, sound-mindedness. Here again we see that this is something that marks them in their inner man. It's who they are as a person. The concept of temperate focused on one of the things that grow out of a clear-mindedness. Sensible focused on how the clear-mindedness was accomplished. How do you become clear-minded? By being sensible. By being self-controlled. By being prudent, discreet. Now let me tell you something. The same word was used in 1 Timothy 3 verse 2 to describe elders, and in Titus 1 verse 8 to describe elders. I don't know if you're seeing a pattern yet. In fact, listen to Romans 12, verse 3. Romans 12, verse 3. It says, "For through the grace given to me, I say to every man among you, not to think more highly of himself than he ought to think, but to think so as to have sound judgment," there's our word, "as God has allotted to each a measure of faith." So, how many people in the congregation are supposed to be sensible? Everybody. So it's not just the older men. Okay, so he says here the older men need to definitely be this, but in other passages he applies that to everybody. Being sensible, having sound judgment, being self-controlled, self-governed. These are characteristics of being a Christian. This leads us to the final three traits. The final three traits which are grouped around the idea of sound. Notice how he ends verse 2. They're to be sound in three areas: in faith, in love, and in perseverance. Three things that should mark older men. They should be sound in what areas? In faith, in love, and in perseverance. Now, let me remind you that the word sound here was used in verse 1, okay, of chapter 2. We already defined what it meant. It meant this is the Greek word that we get our idea of hygiene from, the idea of healthy. This is healthy. In chapter 2, verse 1, it was healthy doctrine. Healthy doctrine. Here, he wants them to be healthy in three areas. Healthy in their faith, healthy in their love, and he wants them to be healthy in their perseverance. Now, I ask myself, what does a healthy faith look like? What is? I don't know if you have any ideas. What is healthy faith? What does that look like? If the word sound is the concept of healthy, spiritually healthy, what does healthy faith look like? Healthy in faith. Any ideas?
Wouldn't it be actively living out what the definition of faith is in Hebrews 11?
Okay. So you said properly living out faith as it's understood in the Bible. That's a little bit better than my definition. What I had is that a healthy faith is a faith that functions as designed by God. I mean, that's how you know the faith is healthy. The faith, because it functions properly. Pam was even more specific than that. She identified it in Hebrews 11. I wasn't that specific, but that's the point. Something is healthy because it does what it's supposed to do. Okay, so now I was thinking about that. So I was thinking in my study. So a healthy faith is a faith that functions as it's intended. So I began to think, well, how does that function? How does it function? I didn't go to Hebrews. I probably should have. I instead went to Luke 17. Luke 17. Now, why did I go to Luke 17? I went to Luke 17 because Jesus and the disciples are in a debate over faith, but it wasn't directly about faith, because it was really about verse 1 of Luke 17 is really about stumbling blocks. That's how this whole issue. That's how the issue of faith came to the surface in Luke. Jesus indicated in verse 1 that there were going to be stumbling blocks. Those of you who heard me teach on this verse, basically, so these stumbling blocks basically means sinful encounters. There are going to be sinful encounters in life. And guess what? As a Christian, you can't stop every sinful encounter. You can't do it, Jesus said. It's not possible. What you can deal with, however, meaning every sinful encounter in the world, you can't stop the sin that's going on in the world. But you can be an instrument to control what happens within the fellowship, brother to brother. That you have some control about. So, when a brother sins against you, what does Jesus say you should do in Luke 17? Forgive him, okay. One time? 7 times. Wow. Luke 17 says, so Jesus says there are sinful encounters in the world. You just can't stop those. But you can deal with sinful encounters in the church. All right? Up to 7 times in one day, Jesus said in verse 4. How did the disciples respond? Oh, that'll be easy to do that. Oh yeah, thank you, Jesus. No problem. I'll do it 7 times. Is that how did they respond? So in verse 5, their reaction was, we don't have enough faith to do that. Okay, we really can't do it. Did Jesus agree with them that the problem was a lack of faith? Did Jesus agree with that conclusion? Yeah, Jesus, it's got nothing to do with the amount of faith. The only issue is the presence of faith. Now, why is the presence of faith sufficient to do what Christ said to do? So how do you know that from Luke 17? I agree with that, but how does Jesus make that clear from Luke 17? You aren't looking at it. So, how does Jesus make Don's point in Luke 17? Excuse me? He uses the mustard seed as an illustration. That shows the littleness of faith. And what can a little mustard seed amount of faith do? Is it because of the faith? It's because of the God, as Don was saying. It's not because of the faith, it's because of the God of that you have faith in. This goes back to Pam's point. It's the properly functioning faith. That's what a sound faith is. A sound faith is a properly functioning faith. It is faith in God. It's genuine faith in God. That can move mountains. Why? Not because of the faith, but because of the God that you have the faith in. Right? So go ahead.
From your discussion so far is more into Hebrews 12, but I'm thinking also faith as a system of belief. What we believe and where we place that faith.
So sound in the faith, maybe, is what you're thinking about?
That's what I was thinking, but I don't know, maybe,
Yeah, I mean, being sound in the faith is important. I don't think that's his point in Titus 2, because he could have easily have put an article in front of that to make it clear, especially since he follows faith with love. So while they should be sound in the faith, I agree with that, absolutely. The point here seems to be faith as a virtue, as a spiritual virtue. And so Jesus in Luke 17 ultimately says that faith manifests itself how? What illustration does he use in Luke 17? After the mustard seed, he uses an illustration to really tell you what faith is all about. What does faith lead us to do? Do you see it there? I wonder if you see it there. He uses a very powerful illustration. He uses the illustration of a slave. Let me get there too. I wasn't in there. I wasn't there either, Brother Don. So, look at what Jesus says here. But which of you, having a slave plowing or tending sheep, will say to him when he has come in from the field, "Come quickly and sit down to eat"? But will he not say to him, "Prepare something for me to eat, and properly clothe yourself, and serve me until I have eaten and drunk, and afterward you will eat and drink"? He does not thank the slave because he did the things which were commanded, does he? So you too, when you do all the things which are commanded of you, say, "We are unworthy slaves. We have done only what we ought to have done." So what does faith cause in the believer's life? It causes a life of what? Humility and obedience. In fact, how about obedient humility? Obedient humility. That's what faith produces. Well, go back to Titus 2. Paul is saying he wants older men to have properly functioning faith. And what does properly functioning faith look like? It manifests itself in humble obedience to Christ's word. Properly functioning faith leads to humble obedience to God's word. And so he tells Titus, help the older men, lead them to understand that they need to be sound in faith, number one. But not just faith. He doesn't want them sound in faith. He wants them sound somewhere else too. He wants them sound in love. Sound in love. What do you think he means by that? Sound in love. What does healthy love look like?
Would this go back to 1 Corinthians 13?
Oh, you knew where I was going right away, Brother Don. Yeah. And now, let me kind of talk about how I got to 1 Corinthians 13. So, sometimes when we think of love, we think of simply an emotion, and I agree it is an emotion, and it's hard to picture an emotion as healthy. I guess it can be healthy. But what I really began to meditate on was the fact that for Christians, love is not just an emotion, love is also an action. An action. And where that comes to the forefront is 1 Corinthians chapter 13. Love as presented in 1 Corinthians 13 is action. In action. And sometimes we miss this in 1 Corinthians 13. Let me show you why. I'm going to do a little English lesson for us. I'm going to be are you a middle school, Jan, or high school? I'm going to be a high school teacher for just a minute, teaching some English grammar. Now, in English, we have so in 1 Corinthians 13, one of the things it says about love, it says love is kind. What's the subject of this sentence? Love is the subject. What's the verb? Is. And it's a to be verb, yes. It's a to be verb, or sometimes we call it a what? Stative? A verb of being. It's a verb of being. Okay, I'll take that one out. A verb of being. Okay, it's a to be verb. And what is kind doing? It's an adjective, okay? It's an adjective. And what is this adjective describing? Love. Okay, now, in this scenario, What is love? Love is kind. And so what is it saying about love? That love is a kind thing. It's a kind thing. It's giving you an attribute of love. As the pew is brown, love is kind. It's a kind thing. But that's not what Paul is saying. Paul's not saying that. We don't have, so Paul uses a verb here, not an is verb, but he uses a regular verb here. But we don't have an English term to translate it. So we translated love as kind, but if we were to translate it like it's written, we say that love kinds. And kinds is a verb. We don't have that. We don't have that verb in English. Love kinds.
Kindness is an action.
Paul is identifying actions in 1 Corinthians 13, not states of being. Love does kindness maybe, or love acts kindly, or love is known in the kindness of its behavior. It's doing something, and what it's doing is you can call what it's doing kind. All right? And so when Paul tells Titus to help older men to be sound in love, he wants them to express love as God intended for it to be expressed. Have properly functioning love within the congregation. He wants them to love rightly in their actions. He wants them to show forth what Christian love really is. Right?
So when Scripture says God is love, in that sense, is it?
I'd have to look at the Greek text. I don't know if it's using an is verb there, or it's using the verb for kind. I don't know from that specific. It would have to depend on what the text says.
Okay. But I was wondering if in that sense you can attribute the characteristics of love back to God, which what's written here is nothing compared to that usage.
Yeah, I would have to look at that specific usage. But what we do know is that when Jesus identifies God's love in John 3:16, how is it identified? By him giving, right? It's an action. It's an action. It's something that is done, that you do. So he wants their love to be sound. But then he finishes with, he wants their perseverance to be sound as well. Perseverance. What is he? Interestingly, Paul told Timothy in 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 11, that Timothy was to pursue perseverance. He was to pursue it. Now, years ago when I taught you through 1 Timothy, this is how I described perseverance. Perseverance is the Christian's loyal, faithful attendance in time to his Lord in the face of all incongruent beliefs, practices, and afflictions in light of the example given by Christ himself. Let me repeat that again. What does perseverance mean? Perseverance is the Christian's loyal, faithful attendance in time to his Lord in the face of all incongruent beliefs, practices, and afflictions in light of the example given by Christ himself. So perseverance is something that Christ did. Christ persevered. We use him as an example. Perseverance is loyalty from us towards God. We're loyal to God in spite of what we're going through. Our loyalty doesn't go up and down depending on our circumstances. We're not loyal because of all the good stuff that happens. We're loyal even in the face of incongruent beliefs, practices, or afflictions. That's perseverance. Christ did it. He's our example. Leads us to be loyal and faithful, and that loyal and faithfulness doesn't depend on circumstances. We're always loyal to him. So he wants these men to be sound in their perseverance. He wants them to function with loyalty to Christ no matter what they're going through. He wants them to be loyal to Christ no matter what they're going through, as Christ himself was loyal. Sound in faith, sound in love, and sound in perseverance. Now, we've noticed here, haven't we, that these are all things that elders must do. I mean, almost every one of these attributes, we saw Paul identify them as part of the elder's life as well. And many times these same ideas should be manifested in every Christian. So all of us should be pursuing these character traits, especially older men, but it's not limited to older men. All of us should be temperate. All of us should be dignified. All of us should be sensible and sound in our faith, love, and perseverance. But especially like people like Don and me who are older men, we definitely need to have those character traits as part of our life.
So I know you said this applies to all Christians, but do you think there is a sense here where with a certain stage in life, you should be mature in these traits?
Yeah, I do think that's his point. Yeah, that these are qualities that I think older men can be challenged in, and they need to spend special attention. The older men need to pay special attention to living this way. Just think of how important it is to have good examples in the church that people can follow. These older men need to be that example. And that's why I believe that Paul deals with them first. They're the first people he addresses, because they really set the tone for the congregation. So just imagine how beneficial it is in a church to have a group of older men who are sound in these areas. That's helpful to the whole congregation. The whole congregation is bettered by it. Churches that don't have men that fit this model, they aren't stable.
So you're saying that many of these churches that you see with just people, just a bunch of young folks, and you don't see any older people there, they're lacking the balance
Absolutely.
Scripture prescribes.
Yeah, absolutely. I do think there's a lack of balance if the whole church is of the younger age. It's clear that Paul was expecting churches to be multi-generational, right? I mean, that's the expectation. Now, we've moved away from multi-generational churches because we've tended to move towards building churches on demographics. And when you demo a church's existence, you try to pull in people that are of the same demographics, because that's how you grow a church, or that's how people are comfortable going with other people from their demo group. But that wasn't Paul's expectation. He expected, again, a multi-generational, multi-ethnic, maybe even, church environment. And so I think that stands out here. But yeah, Don, I'd agree with that there is a strength that a church loses when there's not a a group of older men who evidence these type of qualities that Paul addresses here in verse 2. Yes. Yeah, I'm gonna get to them in a minute. Yeah, absolutely. That's going to be dangerous. Yeah, that's going to be, and we're going to see how dangerous in just a minute. But you definitely don't want that either. You want it multi-generational, male and female. Yeah, absolutely.
Because sometimes we go to, relatives, churches and such, might be younger than us, and go there, mostly young folks, and walk in and they start worshiping and so on and so forth, and say, something right here. It doesn't have the right, seem not to have sometimes the right balance, and they start to teach and they're big and such. I don't know,
Well, I think one of the things that stabilizes a church is the seasoned saints within the body. Now, again, as that's both male and female. That there's a certain stability that comes with age, and the Bible recognizes that. And so Paul is calling the seasoned men of the church, age-wise, to be seasoned spiritually as well. And so just having older men is not sufficient, because I don't want to make the statement the worst fool is an old fool, so it's not just an older person that's in mind here. So Paul is calling these seasoned adults to be seasoned spiritually as well, not just seasoned in their age. Don, you had something to add to that? You're good. Okay, good. So you let it go. All right. So let's go back. So that's the behavior of the older men. Paul now moves to the behavior of the older women. And just as Brother Marlon shared, it's not good enough just to have older men in the church. You need to have older women in the church as well. And Paul would agree with that also. And Paul jumps right into verse 3. Notice, no connecting conjunction or preposition here. He just goes right into what he wants to say to older women. Notice verse 3. Older women, likewise, are to be reverent in their behavior, not malicious gossips, nor enslaved to much wine, teaching what is good. And we'll stop there. So here he turns to older women. Now, well, let me go ahead and read verse 5, because this is also addressed to older women. So they're to teaching what is good. Why? That they may encourage the younger women to love their husbands, love their children, and so on in verse 5. So the first thing that's obvious here, as you read verses 3 and 4, that Titus was not to have the same relationship with younger women that he had with the older women. That's clear from this text. Because notice, Titus is given direct influence on older women, but he's told that the older women are supposed to have the direct influence on younger women. So it seems pretty clear that Titus is not supposed to, in Paul's worldview, is not supposed to deal directly with the young women within the fellowship when it comes to these types of matters. Now, what was to be Who set the pattern for what was to be addressed with the younger women? Let me say it again. So Paul tells Titus that he's not supposed to be directly guiding the younger women. My question is, who sets the agenda for what the younger women are to learn? Nope. Who is it? In this passage, who sets the agenda?
Well, I think it's the older man said likewise here in verse 3, which is going back to what we said.
Who's Paul writing to? Titus. Who sets the agenda for what the young women are supposed to learn? Titus. Who teaches it? The older women. See, this is what I'm kind of digging at here. Some churches use this passage to say, well, no, the elders don't have any role with the women's ministry of our church. Hands off. Paul says hands off in Titus 2. Is Paul telling the elders to have a hands-off viewpoint of the women's ministry in that local fellowship? No, not at all. Not at all. Elders are to have hands-on. The one who is setting the agenda for what the younger ladies are to learn are the elders. That's Titus's job. Now, Titus is not going to pull it off. The older women are the ones who do the teaching. But what do they teach? Titus tells them what to teach. Do you see the relationship here? Paul begins Titus 2 with, Titus, teach the things that are with sound doctrine, fitting for sound doctrine. This is what older men need. This is what older women need. This is what younger women need. This is what younger men need. But with the younger women, Titus, don't you do it. Get the older women to do it. Okay, so we don't believe as a church that the elders cannot instruct women or shouldn't instruct women. We don't believe that. Okay, if the women's ministry needs a teacher and they can't find one, call in one of the elders. That's what they're there for. Let them teach it. Paul would have no problem with that whatsoever. But when it comes to the subject matter and the younger women in particular, they need to have a hands-off when it comes to that. Now, why do we know that it's not just an age problem? Why do we know that this is not just an age issue? Well, the men in the church are older, so they don't know anything, or they can't identify with these younger women. How do we know that it's not an age problem?
But Titus is not old, is he?
He's probably older. I mean, he's probably older than Timothy, I would imagine. He's probably between Timothy and Titus. He's probably between Timothy and Paul. Paul is probably in his 60s or older, so he's probably up there. I mean, he may not be 60 himself, but he would be considered part of the older group, I would imagine. So how do we know that it's not just an issue of age here?
Well, it seems to address younger women. It also addresses young men in the text.
Let me ask you a question. Why do the older men have to teach the younger men?
Yes.
Is that what he says here? He doesn't say it, does he? So he says, Titus, you teach the older men. Titus, you teach the older women. Get the older women to teach the younger men. Titus, you teach the younger men. So it's not an issue of age. Age isn't the problem. What's at issue here is propriety. It doesn't look right for men to be mentoring women, young women who are mothers and wives. It doesn't look proper. And we shouldn't be having that in the church. It's a propriety issue. It doesn't look right.
Well, it's just different because mothers are different. You know, if you're teaching a younger woman how to be a mother, man can't, well, he could try doing that. But seriously, you know, a woman would be better. Another mother would be more capable of identifying with that young woman.
I agree with that. I do want to be careful, but I agree. First off, I agree with you. Yes, absolutely. But I also want to be careful because it's not just being a mother that he says young women need to be taught. They need to be taught how to be sensible. They also need to be taught how to be pure, how to be kind. Those are all things that men could teach them, but it doesn't look right.
So
It doesn't look right.
you're not just talking about teaching the word, you're talking about, you use the word mentoring, which is different from just teaching.
Well, I'm combining those two.
Okay.
Yeah. Go ahead, Brother Mount.
Spending time with these people, people would say disciple and whatever. So I think, or I guess the question is, would you say that that's what's in mind?
Yeah.
Because again, obviously a man can teach
Anything.
Not only can, he should teach every single person of the church, but as far as walking with, you walking side by side with this person, spending time with them, that shouldn't be the case when you have a man and a woman.
And a younger woman, yeah, which is why, again, I focus on the idea of it doesn't look right. And so we do see here that the Bible tries to regulate people so that they do things that are proper. So now if you bump into a church where the pastor is spending a lot of time with younger women and he's helping them, you ought to take pause. Now again, maybe he doesn't have older women in the church. He needs to try to find some, okay? Because that's not something he should be doing, walking with them. All right? Go ahead. Yeah, what we have here is so when we get to the older men and the younger women, what we see is the older women and the younger women is we see a combination of mentoring and teaching going on. What we see going on with the other groups, I don't want to say is hands off because no teaching is hands off, but it's not as much mentorship as what's going on with the older women and the younger women. When I get to the younger women, I'm going to talk a little bit about the fact that you have to keep in mind that this is the early church, and a lot of these people are first generation Christians. And what's true of first generation Christians is you didn't grow up in a Christian home. How do you know what a Christian mother looks like? How would you even know that? How would you know what a Christian wife looks like? I mean, how would you gain the skills to be a Christian homemaker and rearer of children if you grew up in a pagan household. Well, you wouldn't. Which is why you need the older women to come alongside to help you to apply the realities of the Christian faith to the context of being a mother and a wife. Right? Well, that's a little bit different relationship than what we see going on with what's going on with the older men and the older women. I can go to a woman's meeting and talk about gossip, okay, which is one of the things that he deals with, and I can deal with gossip and why it shouldn't be part of your life, and encourage the older women of the church to reject it. That doesn't necessarily take me walking with the older women to be able to do that, but the type of things that's required of the younger woman does require somebody to walk with her, I believe, based on what's going on in the culture of this day. We're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves. I know that we're not in verse 5 and 6, but that's kind of where we're headed. So the first thing I wanted you to see is I wanted you to see that Titus was to have a different relationship with the younger women in the church than he was to have with the older men, older women, and younger men. There was a different type of relationship Paul was requiring of Titus. All right. So let's jump in. We can at least deal with one or two of these before our Bible study hour is up. So he says, let me read it again. Verse 3, the older women likewise are to be reverent in their behavior, not malicious gossips, not enslaved to much wine, teaching what is good. What does the word likewise tell you? The older women likewise.
What went on before, what he was talking about before.
Yeah, what he was talking about before. And so just as the older men need to be instructed, guess what the older women need? They need instruction too. Okay, they're not immune because they're older women. All right? Well, I was going to tell you some stories, but I won't tell you the stories because I'd have to change the names of the people who are involved. But yes, and so older women need guidance, just like older men need guidance. And just because a person is in their golden years does not mean they've been elevated above the need to be instructed, above the need to be guided. All right. Yes.
One question.
Go ahead.
Is the first part here. Why, oftentimes, Paul would say teach, but in Titus 2:1, he says speak. Speak the things which are fitting for sound doctrine. And then we see we talk about the persuaders.
Yeah, so I dealt with that last week, but basically my argument was that the speaking here was not referring to the general language, your general speech, but he was talking about instruction and preaching. That those two things were what he was supposed to be affirming publicly. All right, so the older women also need to be guided. What do they need to be guided in? Well, first off, they need to be reverent in their behavior. Reverent in their behavior. Both of these Greek terms, the one for reverent and the one for behavior, are used only here in the New Testament. This is the only place that these two words occur in the Greek text. They're not used anywhere else. The word behavior basically meant deportment or demeanor. Deportment or demeanor. Behavior. Reverent in their behavior. The word reverent was a combination of two words. One word was temple, T-E-M-P-L-E, and the second word was on fitting or suitable. When you put those two ideas together, what you get is something that was fitting or corresponded to the temple. In this context, we could describe it as that which is fitting or corresponding to God. That which is fitting or corresponding to God. So what we have here is a person who takes their relationship with God seriously. The older women need to be taught that they need to take their relationship with God seriously. They need to be women who carry themselves in such a way that their character stands out. They're reverent in their behavior, how they conduct themselves. They're not frivolous, all right? They're serious people. Again, not saying that they can't play with their grandkids, okay? But they know the time. They know what's appropriate, okay? This is the time to play. This is the time not to play, all right? And they have an understanding of that. This is a person who takes the fact that they belong to God seriously, so much so that they seek to conform every aspect of their conduct and life to God's will. So these older women are to be taught that they are to be serious about their relationship with God, so serious that they seek to conform all the aspects of their conduct to the will of God. Reverent in their behavior. Their behavior needs to show reverence, that it fits. It fits somebody who's serious. Their behavior fits somebody who's serious about God. Right? Reverent in their behavior. You know, when you put these two ideas together, reverent and behavior, what's being pictured here is a woman who carries and conducts herself much like a priest would in the service of God in God's temple, because she has an internal gauge or barometer that's tuned to God's standards. Her barometer is tuned to God's standards. Let me illustrate this. In 1 Timothy 2, verse 9 and 10, it discusses how the women in the congregation should conduct themselves. Just listen to what Paul says here in 1 Timothy. You already know it well, but 1 Timothy 2, 9 and 10. Paul makes this statement. 1 Timothy 2, 9 and 10. Likewise, I want women to adorn themselves with proper clothing, modestly and discreetly, not with braided hair and gold or pearl or costly garments, but rather by means of good works. Now watch this last phrase here. As befits women making a claim to godliness. That last phrase is almost exactly the same in its meaning to our phrase in Titus. Older women are to live out their claims of godliness. They claim to be godly. They claim to be Christian women. They should manifest that self. They should manifest that fact in their behavior, how they live. A Christian woman is to be so concerned with aligning her life with God's will and standard that she shows it even in how she dresses, demonstrates that reality. Surely, if a woman conforms to God in her dress, she's really a godly woman. That's a little joke, but I guess nobody laughed at it. But you know, this is a challenge for women. Let's confess, women have a struggle with dress. They want to dress appropriately and properly, and so Paul identifies that an older woman knows how to dress properly, and embraces that. She embraces that. She's not immodest, she's not indiscreet in her dress. If immodesty and indiscretion does not become a younger Christian woman, surely it does not become an older woman either. Both young and old alike are to be, in their demeanor, examples of Christian living. Let's stop there. We'll pick up next week. Well, I guess in a couple weeks we'll pick up a little further on. Any questions on what we learned so far this evening, or observations? All right. Did anybody miss communion that would like to take communion this evening?